So here we are back in Lightwave Modeler, and I want to talk to you about layers. So let's go ahead and load up the object that we just did in the previous video that we can use within the layers. So I'm going to go to the File dropdown, and we're going to say Load Object, and then from our Objects folder in the Projects folder, we are going to load the file case surface. You should have these in your downloads. We'll click Open, and of course there is the case. We'll press the A key to fit, and of course that's how you're going to load any kind of object in Lightwave. Now when I do this, you can see that I've got two layers automatically selected. Now I've always told this story. People that have taken my training before know that when I first got into Lightwave 20 years ago, actually it's more than that, it was 1990, Lightwave 1.0, those layers were there. And Modeler only had probably like 6 buttons at the time, but the layers were there, and I had no idea what they did. Well, they're actually an integral part of any model you create. It's going to be used for booleans, and you're going to use it for parenting things. Some of the features didn't come on until a little bit later, but without that too much explanation, let's go here into the Layers tab and take a look at what we can do. We can open up the Layers panel, and you can always press F7 to do that. Now, in this Layers panel, you've got FB, name, num, and a little weird thing right there. That, my friends, is an eyeball, and that's a visibility icon. This drop-down, which a lot of people don't even know is there, is a list or hierarchy view. So if you've got a lot of objects, you can actually look at their parenting relationship, the hierarchy, the parent-child relationship, right from that, or you can choose list. Now, by default, it's set to list, so we're going to leave it like that. But let's click the little triangle to swing this open, and you can see that if I select this one, well, there's number 1, layer 1. That layer is now selected up here in the top right. Number 2 is unnamed, but we put the lid in there in the previous video. Notice, of course, number 2 is selected, layer 2. So what I can do is double click this to name it, or, I've got tools over here now to do things, to swap layers and copy and delete. Now, I would always do these pretty much just kind of in this layers panel, but you do have buttons now, such as layer settings. Now this change layer name, of course, that is for the selected layer. Typically what I would do is double click this and get that exact same panel. So your choice. So layer name, this is lid. And while I'm in here, I could say parent that lid to the bottom. Click OK. And now that lid is parented to the bottom. Well, did it do anything? No. But when I get to layout, when I move the case, when I move the bottom, the lid will go with it. This is where this little guy comes in handy, because I can say, show me in a hierarchy view, and you'll see that now there's a little arrow there, and of course the lid is inside the bottom. And when it's indented like that, you know that that belongs to the parent name above it. Let's talk a little bit about foreground and background. Right now, F, foreground, is checked. I can turn that off just by clicking the other object or the other layer. But if I want to put something in the background, I can click in the background list, like that. And when it's in a background, it is that black wireframe. That signifies that that's a background layer. Later on in the course, I'll show you how some of the booleans work, and you'll be able to reference building objects with background objects. You'll boolean things to cut holes or stencil things with background layers. So that's one reason they're really important. And of course the other reason is for animation, which is what we're doing here. In order to rotate this lid, I had to set the pivot point so it actually rotates from a certain position, and we did that in the previous video. So now we need it in a separate layer so that it can rotate on its own without rotating with the original object. And all of that is controlled right here in this layers panel. Very, very handy, and this is preliminary setups for all the things you're going to do when you get to the Lightwave layout. All right, so you can very easily select all the foreground or all the background just by clicking in the top list here by the name. Very easy, and you can close that up. The last thing you need to know is that if you uncheck the eyeball, that layer won't show up in Lightwave layout. So let's do this. Let's hit Command S, and that saves our surface file case. And then we are going to say send object to layout from the top right drop down. Give it a second, layout will fire up, and there is our object. But both layers are in there, and if you look down here at the very bottom, current item, file case lid, and file case bottom. Those were the two layer names we created. If I jump back to Modeler, there's my lid and there's the bottom. If I rename this to top, just by double clicking and then changing the name, click OK, Command S to save, and in this case I'm going to use Command and Tab to jump layers, and you'll see that I can jump that way. Alt-Tab, I believe, on the PC. Now take a look. Now I've got bottom and top. Okay, that name changed, and the file is jumping back and forth between these two programs because of the hub. And this is run automatically when you start layout in Modeler. Now you can see that I've expanded all this to show you how much data is in here. And this is really just things you don't necessarily need to worry about. It's all running in the background. There are some automatic shutdown options that you can set down at the very bottom. But for the most part, unless you're really needing some specific controls over background processes, you don't need to get into the hub. Let it do its thing, and it will take care of your model back and forth between Lightwave Layout and Modeler. But that's what that hub is if you see it running. So when I've gone in and I've renamed things to top or bottom, it shows up in there. Now one other thing I can do is jump back into Modeler and turn off the lid. Just uncheck it from that eyeball column. Hit save. Now notice we can still see it here in Modeler without issue. But if I jump back, Alt-Tab, back to Layout, I'm going to clear the scene. So we'll come up here to the top file drop down, and we will clear scene. We don't have to save. And then let's jump back to Modeler and let's resend this. Every once in a while you might need to do that, or synchronize layout, and it syncs the hub along with layout. Now that I've done that, you can see that I have just the bottom and there's no lid. Okay. Well, why would you do that? Why would you build something, put it on another layer, and then not save it with the model? Well, a lot of reasons. You can have a model that's maybe you bought or that maybe you downloaded from somewhere and you've built around it, use it as a background layer as reference, and you don't need that to be in your scene. Perhaps you have other parts of the model that you don't actually need rendered and you don't need it in the animation, but you need it for building, like cutting holes and doing stencils and things like that. Well, that's where that uncheck comes in pretty handy. It's kind of like using Photoshop and having multiple layers, and one layer is a reference or one layer is blended with another layer, but then you turn that off for your final output. That's essentially what we've done here. So you can always come back in, turn that on, save, and then sometimes when you come back to update, it doesn't. And that is the one issue you need to be careful with when doing certain things in with the hub between Modeler and Layout. So if I just now send this back out, I cleared my scene, it comes back up. So what I recommend in order to get this hub to work right is model everything, set it up the way you want, save, and then quit. And then everything will work properly. Just load them up in here. Because remember, in Layout, you're working with a copy of what's in Modeler. So if you make a change to the one in Modeler and you save it, it might update what you have in Layout, which you may have further manipulated, and it will take you back a step. So just be really conscious of when you're saving and when you've got a model here and you've got the same model open in Modeler, because it is a copy. Well, lastly, I'll show you that because we had moved that pivot point, you could see that that rotational handle, in this case a transform handle, but if I press the Y command on my keyboard, I'll get rotation. You'll see that that now is exactly where the pivot was, and what that means is I can close my lid pretty easily because I set that pivot point. And of course I don't want to close it that far, but we'll talk about all these tools a little later on. But very simple modeler usage using layers, working with two simple layers just to get our project started and get you familiar with Lightwave 11.